Winter here at Andersonville, and today we're going to be taking a brief walk out onto our historic prison site. Here at Andersonville, we do spend a great deal of our time talking about the Civil War and the reality for prisoners of war in both the North and the South. Today on our tour, we're going to be thinking about our prison from the perspective of the United States soldiers who were held here. And if you saw our sign there in the museum, what you'll see is there was a vast number, over 20,000 there in that field last night. Just think about what that meant. If we were 150 years ago, 20,000 people in a field. And unfortunately, as time has come along and our prison site has been open for just over going on 4 months now, the reality is 2,000 men are dead. 2,000 men are dead in just 4 months, considering that. Walking around here, we talk quite a bit about choices. About what choices did the governments make regarding their soldiers? What choices do individual soldiers make regarding their lives and the lives of the men around them? And then if we were faced by all the same circumstances, what do you think you would do? What choices would you make? A couple things to watch out for as we're walking out there. It is a field. We're not going to go too terribly far, but it is uneven in a few places, so just watch where you place your feet. And the big red pile of dirt that you occasionally come across are fire ants, so best to walk around and not through them. Easy enough. As I said, we'll be about just, weather permitting, out about 40 to 45 minutes. So stepping onto our prison site is a good opportunity to ask questions, things you're interested in. And if you hang with me, I'll do the whole overview of kind of the general prison experience, and so maybe it might answer your question as we're going along. All right, so if we're ready set, let's head right on out.
Keeping up on.
Okay.
We had Civil War battle. Sure. And he did a lot of artwork of what Williamsburg looked like during the war and the Union occupation, but I didn't.
Yeah, that was here. And if you look at the Virginia Historical Society has digital thumbnails of his images. So.
Yes, I've printed out some before.
All right, we'll keep going to the 64s, and you get to Andersonville there. All right. Well, our first stop here is to start familiarizing you with the landscape of a Civil War prison, specifically this one. Looking out to the field there, it is hard to imagine what this place was like with 20,000 United States soldiers, and the numbers are going to keep growing as we go towards July and August. We will reach a peak at one time, 33,000 men inside that field. And so the numbers are vast. Consider the communities, the counties, how many people that is that you can try to figure out what that looks like in one field. As you can tell, the original prison site did not survive the last 150 years, and it's a difficult question of do you protect a prison or a place that very difficult choices were made. Most of the wooden stockade walls will fall basically apart, and as I like to say, they tend to end up in farmers' fence posts, fireplaces, and souvenir hunters, even as early as 1865. So around us today, what we have is the outline of our prison site and 2 reconstructions. One reconstruction over there in the corner, a second one just down the hillside at the north gate. What we do have that's original here to our prison site is what's behind me here, what's behind you over there, and off in the distant corners are earthworks. A lot of times folks don't think too much about those big old piles of dirt, but we like to think about them here as footprints of war. So whether you're passing through a small community or a big battlefield or a place like Andersonville, these remind us that war left an imprint on the very ground. These are also a direct connection to the slave labor that was used throughout this region. Slaves were brought here before the prison opens to construct it, and so digging these positions here, they gave protection to Confederate artillery crews. Now the reality is, if you're going to hold thousands of United States soldiers, there's a very good chance that the Union Army wants them back. And so the possibility of battle is real. So digging into positions around the entire prison site, because you never know what direction the general's coming from, they have to be prepared. But the reality is these earthworks shield, as you can see, cannons. And these cannons are not only going to be used maybe defensively if a Union Army comes down here, but the reality is with 33,000 men in that field and only around 1,000 to 4,000 Confederate guards, who's got the better odds?
Prisoners.
By a great deal, the prisoners far outnumber the guards. And so the reality is, how do you keep a large number of those prisoners in there from desperation turning to rioting, burning the prison down, or trying to fight their way out? Remind them that there are cannons positioned around this entire prison site that can easily be turned. And so the reality is, why weren't there any huge escape attempts out of Andersonville? They knew that fire was waiting for them. And there was definite orders that if that would occur there, they would open fire on an unarmed prison population. So when you see these cannons, it's really a two-front war. The idea of an army coming to this place and trying to keep another army in place right behind us there. So last thing too, we always make sure our footprints of war continue to tell us the story today because they're here and we get a chance to see them. We make sure everybody realizes, how do you protect a pile of dirt for another 150 years? Just stay off the top of it. Easy enough. But we do suggest, go take a look at those cannons and imagine what it is like as an artillery crew to be fearful of an oncoming army and fearful at the men at your back. What will happen if they got free? How will they treat you? How will they treat the county? What will they do if these men manage to escape? So our next stop is going to be moving a little bit farther onto our prison site. Actually, the prison initially opens as a 16-acre field, 16-acre square with a creek cutting right through the center. Today what you see is a 26-acre field. So the additional 10 acres don't come along until July. And so today, since we're still here in June, we're going to walk up to where roughly where the original wall was first. So straight ahead, right out towards that little concrete box.
The movie said that Sherman's forces came fairly close to the area,
They do.
but why do you think that they would divert and made an attempt?
They did. They did, absolutely. Just after making a force was sent south and they failed. They were turned back by Confederate forces and a number of them captured.
And were any POW camps used by the Union forces throughout the war?
It actually shows the brilliance of the locations they chose. In most cases, it's going to be officers' prisons because they were in a little bit more centralized areas. They placed most of the stockade prisons out here so remotely, they were virtually impossible. Maybe it's a good example of that. They managed to free the officers this, but that's the full-size prison. Before July, basically the first week of July, the prison basically has a wall where we're standing and extends down to the creek and up the opposite side, so it's roughly a square. And so this section, these 10 acres that we just walked through, roughly, were added after July because of overcrowding, because the prison population has doubled what they said would be placed here. Andersonville initially was scouted to hold 10,000 United States soldiers brought over from other prisons, such places like Bell Island and Richmond there, and Libby Prison, because they are overcrowded with individuals inside those warehouse prisons. And so at first, this place is a solution to that problem of overcrowding. So looking around us, what kind of resources do you see around here that make this a good place for a prison? What do we got here? Timber, first off. You need trees to build structures, hopefully barracks, and of course support structures for officers. So it was forested to begin with. It was cleared by the slaves that were brought here, and they start building those walls around the stockade. Also, lumber, various wood pieces will go into hopefully some shelter construction. Also, structures in the town of Andersonville. All right, what else we got?
Water. Drainage and water.
All right, drainage and water. Heavily curved into that creek. What a lot of folks don't realize when you look at a picture of Andersonville, they think it's a flat field. It's not. It's actually heavily curved on down, which hopefully should allow for some drainage, so things can run off into that creek. Creek begins off in this direction and runs through the prison site. So freshest water over to this side, in the middle bathing water or washing water, and then to this end the latrines for everybody. And so that water situation will be dire. As the temperatures rise, you'll start feeling it today. You know, we've been out 10, 12 minutes, getting a little thirsty, starting to get a little bit warmer. Imagine how this amplifies. Now for prisoners, the creek was basically tested to have enough for 10,000, and already 4 months into it, we have double that number. And so water is always going to be a challenge for prisoners here. Now, if you can't get water from your creek, where else can it come from? Underground or above ground, right? Waiting for rain and collecting it with whatever you have, or start digging and reaching down for a well. We walked right past a little concrete marker, just one of the dozens, maybe hundreds of wells prisoners were busy digging, 20, 30, 40 feet straight down through hard ground, hand dug. One prisoner even said his well was 90 feet. So imagine that, digging straight down. But the opportunity to reach clean water will save your life. And once you have clean water to drink, not only has it improved your chance of survival, you now have a business. You can sell or trade access to that water. But problematic considering as folks begin to sicken, and of course human waste will litter the prison site as they fail to get down to the creek down there. What can happen when it rains and you have a well? All of that up here can end up down there. And so wells are a constant business in that you must protect it from others, you must protect it from contamination. And if it gets filled in with things that you don't want to drink, you got to start over. Now, most of the soldiers come through here when they hear that you were digging a 40, 50, 90-foot well, they also start thinking about digging what else? Escape, right? That's the one thing you're going to start thinking of out here in a prison site, how to get out of it. Well, the water is provided. We've got trees around here. Any other resources that make this a good place? What else might you need? How do you bring your prisoners down here from Richmond? By rail. Easy enough. Town of Andersonville had a rail depot. It was a small town then. It's a small town today, but they had some train tracks. So prisoners are brought down and they are marched that last mile into the prison site. So coming from town, that's a historic route that they would come. And that is also transportation for not only bringing prisoners here, it is also for taking them away and bringing supplies. If you can bring prisoners just about every single day of the year that this prison was open, what else can you bring? Supplies. You can bring goods. This rail line was never cut. Prisoners are arriving or leaving from here depending on what's going on. That means supplies could be brought here, but choices, right? How do you win a war? Is it by sending extra supplies, medical treatment, and tents to your enemy? Not in most estimations. These battles matter, and each battle could mean the difference between winning and losing the war. And so with that, we see lots of choices. Overlooking our prison site in the distant corner, right over there on the right, the Star Fort, another expansive earthwork, just like we were talking about, and the commander's headquarters. Ultimately, the highest-ranking man involved with Andersonville is General John H. Winder. He is in control of multiple prisons across the South, including Andersonville. He will spend a short amount of his time here, but has a heart attack by February of 1865 and is never held responsible for his actions related to Andersonville and other southern prisons.
Did it kill him, the heart attack?
Yes, it
Okay,
did.
I just wanted to
He
make sure
died.
that-
He died
okay.
at that time, and that was it. So, in addition to that, Captain Henry Wirtz, the most famous man associated with it, has direct control over where we stand here today. He is in control of the lives of these prisoners inside this stockade. He may not have control over how the quartermaster sends supplies or the commissary, and he may not have control over where the guards come and go from, but he has control over access to supplies, building, expansion, water, and such as it relates to the prisoners. So the one man that they're going to know and remember, Captain Wirtz. And certainly, as you may know, having toured through our museum and seen our films, he's going to be the one that will be ultimately held responsible for the lives lost here at Andersonville. Now, looking across here, once again, 21,000 people, starting from where we stand here over to the other side. But by July, the heat, the numbers have swelled. What do? Choices. Do you build a second prison with a second water source down there where there's another creek? Or what do? What's the most effective and inexpensive way to go? Knock out the wall and add an expansion. And so as we draw back, we're going to head over towards those shelters because the temperatures are soaring. Each prisoner at this time would be entering in here looking for shade, just like we are right now. So we'll step over towards those shelters and talk a bit about that expansion as prisoners move through it. They fled through there willing to build whatever they can. If you bring in a stick or a blanket, you can build with that. If you don't, all you have is the ground beneath you. Most
I mean, it was just pointing about smaller.
right, and barracks are provided in most of the Union prison camps because they are converted military facilities. So they have structure.
What was that? Whether it
Yeah.
they have just a top base.
With him,
Prisoners could send letters occasionally to Henry.
they could sure attempt it. Here, mailing out of they'll try to have stamps for both the Confederate and Union, the United States and the Confederate. Then letters are heavily censored by officers and their wives, and most information and money is out of supplies were sent, and once again, most of it censored and items got in. There's a few accounts that come in, but most are restricted. And we do know for a fact that the burning probably a very big percentage of what this town looks like. It really just depends on where they're coming from. If they come from another prison, there's a good chance that they have already traded away, cut it up from other prisoners that have stolen. Coming from the battlefield, if you are newly caught, you may still be carrying a good portion of your supplies. And so it just depends on kind of the needs of the guard each time you enter into Andersonville, whether they are seizing those items or whether you have bartered. Sure. There were both governments are overseeing prison operations, but the two main kind of service organizations are trying to aid prisoners it's going to be the Christian Commission, the U.S. Christian Commission, and the USA Safety. So they are the types that will be providing reports on the conditions, hospital, and supplies. In addition to that, we find that the groups that are actually most effective across both the north and the south in bringing aid to prisoners, actually Catholics and the Masons. The most effective groups that manage to utilize, they leverage whether there's a Mason prisoner and a Mason guard, they work together. So interesting connections that way. And feel free to step on in, so come on around. There are very few of those groups.
Did that go both ways? Did you say, or on top?
It did, yeah. So it's shocking that way. And we have a number of examples of that here. So we know that if a prisoner came in, the Masons are a good example. I was reading up on that most recently. If a prisoner was a member of the Masons, he may have some kind of insignia, some kind of ring, or a handshake, or some kind of signal. If he passed in here and a guard noticed it or was familiar with it, they would try to divert them to positions of trust. So working in the hospital or clerking or sometimes burying the dead. And so anytime you're outside these walls, your life is improved because you're outside, right? You are not stuck in this mess here inside the stockade. So we have a number of examples of that. Beyond that, the civilians, that's a good question about kind of the civilian interaction, how many agencies or groups attempted to bring aid. Speaking for Andersonville specifically, civilians from Americus, Georgia, about 10 miles to the south, organized. And you got to imagine these were the church ladies, their minister husbands, a few of the doctors in some relation to the hospital here. They bring together wagons of aid, food, clothing, shelter, items that could be used. Now certainly it might not be enough for 20,000, but they came up here, and in one instance, some of that was supplies were allowed in, even if it was just allowed to the hospital, but it was allowed in. But in every other effort to bring supplies to the prison site, they were turned away and cursed as unpatriotic to the Confederate cause and charged or threatened with charges of treason. So imagine that, humanitarian effort, and, you know, famously being cursed out for, gosh darn your mission of mercy. You can imagine they used the real words for all that. So considering that, and these folks, they cared. They were not, and they said, we are not unionists. We are not Northern sympathizers, but we're humane. And they wanted to bring aid here, and yet it was turned away. So when you ask, were people aware of this? Absolutely. Governments, state governments, and individuals are well aware of what's happening in places like Andersonville. And we'll have stories, unfortunately, like that across the board. Northern and southern prisons will have commanders, some that allow that aid, that allow those kinds of things, others that do not. And this is a case where it was not allowed. So looking around us here, imagining prisoners coming through those gates, left to the open conditions. The temperature is rising, we're getting hotter even after 20 or 30 minutes. Bringing in rope or blankets, canvas or rubberized canvas, even a shirt may improve what you've got here, because right now the one thing we want is just a little bit of shade. Lacking any of that, you dig in where you can, and literally prisoners would dig into the landscape around us, creating holes or burrows across this whole hillside. And so look at each one of these shelters. I do like to say they're like icebergs. You're just seeing the tip of them. So imagine each shelter deeper, 3 or 4 feet. Remember, they're busy digging 90-foot wells. If you can dig that much, you can certainly dig your shelter deeper.
What are they digging with?
Whatever you can think of you might carry. Your hands, your cup, your spoon, a rock, a stick, a broken shovel. Whatever you could imagine, little pieces of, even pocket knives. And pocket knives are allowed inside. No weapons, no guns, but small items. And so leveraging that together, they're digging. Main rules for a prisoner inside of Andersonville, of course, be mindful of the guards on the towers. They are told that by approaching the deadline here too closely, the deadline is this small fence that runs around the interior of the prison site. If you touch it, lean on it, trip over it, or try to step beyond it, you may risk being shot by that guard up there. That is an attempt to escape. And it's a brilliant principle that Captain Wirtz did initiate here. If you don't have access to that wall, you can't go through it, can't go over it, what do you got left? Under it. And so still thinking about that digging around these parts. Your last option also that a lot of folks forget. Try in any way to go back out those gates, because that is one of the most effective ways to get out of this prison, right? Go through the gates. Now, beyond this here, Andersonville is defined, of course, by the lack of resources that are ultimately diverted to the prisoners. We're surrounded by farm country, and prisoners will consume mainly cornmeal. So imagine those grits that you've seen before, dry and coarse. Do you want to eat them raw? No. Neither did they, right? So boiling it, adding salt or sugar, anything they can do to try to improve some grits or ultimately cornmeal, they will attempt. And also the idea of hope, trying to keep hope alive long enough to live through another day, a hot day or a rainy day, and try to get home. We'll see it remarkable in a number of stories, whether it's the kindness shared between men as they come into this prison site, sharing resources such as your shelter, and even taking something as simple as one kernel of corn and planting it. And we have images, stories of what that's like when they took their corn, which was so coarse you wouldn't even be able to chew it without breaking your teeth, and yet they planted it with the hopes of growing something. Remember, many of these men were farmers, right? And they knew that. They understood farming. And so that says hope, because they hope they're going to be alive in a couple more weeks for that corn to grow. Today we show an example of that. We've got some corn growing right along one of our shelters, trying each day, planted just around Easter, trying to get that corn to grow. That's a sign of hope, right? Hoping that this will help. It's something to care for, too. Between caring for your fellow soldiers and the corn you grow, that's something that will keep you living a little bit longer. Also, plotting to escape will keep you alive a little bit longer, right? So as we think about how you might try to break out of Andersonville, we'll head towards those trees and get a little break from the sun. And let's think about how would you try to get out of here. Good chance, at least both. If not,
You're fine.
if not
I'm
more.
waiting for them to
More than that. Most of the escape tunnels can perform themselves because they need their security fence there. Yeah, that one back there is not going to be an escape tunnel. They're all in the next second. Your next that they were still profited by their owners' estimation. So when they would not do them, it comes down to that kind of personhood versus trust. And with that decision, it locked them down. Certainly the union saw the benefit, they saw it, absolutely, and they held to it in that respect. But the issue of those, had they exchanged them, you got to imagine how by not exchanging prisoners, and this happens over the issue of African American men in the Union Army. Union Army says they are now soldiers. They're not property anymore. That means that if you're going to exchange them, they need to be exchanged equally for white soldiers. When you can't have the same definition of soldier, it breaks down. And that's why that is a highly unpopular choice on Lincoln's part. Hugely unpopular in the North because, first off, he is making a statement about race, very, straight off about this. It is turning towards the abolitionist war by that point. By 63 and 64, they've changed the very, very kind of scope of the war and gotten behind the abolitionists for their aid. It also means that by adding them into the Union ranks, you are now saying that the white soldiers who are in places like Andersonville will stay there until a better agreement is reached, or you can decide that everybody's going to get exchanged. So families of white soldiers hate this policy because their family is stuck here. And so you'll see this quotes about, it is greater mercy to the men in the field to keep these prisoners here because they're not facing them again. But you can imagine every single family of the 45,000 men who are held here, how they felt about the issue of prisoner exchange and how they agitated and lobbied and said, we need to change this. And yet it would basically take the end of the war to change the matter, to end it. So looking across here, prisoners who are here, both white and black, we do have black soldiers held inside our prison site. Traditionally, the policy was supposed to be that they would be returned to slavery if captured. Because the issue was much muddier than that, most of them are actually held just inside the stockade. A small portion compared to the thousands of other men who are here, a couple hundred versus thousands. Imagine that dynamic between white and black Union soldiers. How do they feel? And yet we see very little instances of violence between each other. So fascinating in that respect. Beyond that, also, looking around the prison site, a massive operation including those between 800 and 4,000 Confederate guards from Georgia and Alabama, and a civilian population that is in and around here. Imagine with this many guards camped between here and town, how many local citizens saw an opportunity to make some money, right? Bringing goods, services, pies, cakes, anything you think a hungry soldier would want today, well, they wanted it back then too, right? Coming by train, they came to sell those goods. And if you were a cunning prisoner inside here and managed to hide your coin, rings, or some kind of service, you would come in here possibly with resources. Now, if those items were stripped from you, you were left with what you either stole or found here. But coming in with money, money always helps, right? Always the big issue. Money always helps. So passing in here, you might start black market trade with the guard. There's even a store inside Andersonville run by a Confederate sutler, so you could buy goods if you got the money to do so. So it all comes down to that. Now, considering that, though, with the low amount of food, the dirty water, and the high contamination rate between prisoners, what's the next thing you want to get out of the way? You want to leave, right? And so starting to analyze the prison site for its weaknesses, what they find is a few things. Now, today we've just been talking about really one wall. Reality is there's two more on the outside. There are two more layers of defense going out from the prison site and the deadline. So your deadline, your main wall, your second wall, even a third wall in a few places. And who's out there to greet you if you dig out under 3 different walls? Guards, cannons, earthworks, and a 60-mile enemy perimeter. This prison was well chosen by location. It's in the middle of nowhere. If y'all thought it was hard to get to today, imagine that, by foot. So we know that. We know we're not convenient to any interstate. But it was well chosen in that respect, and surrounded by farm country and civilians who will know if you're a stranger. Now, also inside here, we like to spend a little time just kind of making it even more complex of an issue. In the first 3 months of operation, almost 1 in 3 of the men who die here in Andersonville as Union prisoners, as United States soldiers, are from southern states. These were men who left in 61. They left and joined the Union, and they are from Alabama and Georgia and Kentucky and Virginia and Tennessee. Imagine what that means, especially if you're a soldier from Georgia who left in 61 and you're back here as a prisoner. How is that dynamic when you see the man on that tower is your neighbor? What's that feel like? How does that dynamic work? And so difficult choices for how do you relate to them. Now, thinking about that escape tunnel, we've been thinking about it. We see our fenced-in trees, this one right here and the one just past us. Those are like the last vestiges of those impressions, just little holes in the ground. Now, the trees that we are enjoying shade out of, no good to the prisoners. They grew up after the war. So they all come later, following up. But imagine digging out of here, hiding your escape tunnel, digging out, and still risking facing all those guards on the outside. How's that going to work out for you? What can happen to tunnels? Yeah, simple enough. Cave-in and collapse, suffocation, drowning, and someone could turn you in. Deal is inside here, because of the level of desperation of these men, Union soldiers will turn against Union soldiers. Theft, assault, and murder happen inside this prison between Union soldiers. That's desperate. That is desperate issues. They will call them marauders and robbers and raiders. Lots of terms for them. And those individuals will become such a nuisance, such a problem, such a threat to these men inside here, thousands of men, that they ultimately seek permission from Captain Wirtz and the authorities to round them up. And so a vigilante group of Union soldiers gets together here in the prison site. They get clubs, just sticks of wood, and they'll round up those raiders. Actually, a couple hundred men are arrested out of the thousands that are present here, and they have a trial. A trial by Union soldiers against Union soldiers. The Confederacy washes its hands of this justice, but they give them the permission to do so. And in that trial, it takes place outside the stockade. They'll find 6 leaders, right? Simple enough. 6 leaders and a few hundred also related to various crimes, but not as severely. The ones who are cut loose as not being leaders must run a gauntlet of fellow prisoners armed with sticks and clubs. Desperate men ready to exact some revenge. If the men who are running the gauntlet fall, they will be beaten to death. And we see about the day that that happens, 1 or 2 die of wounds, and there's a good chance that was because they were running the gauntlet coming back in. Unfortunately, none of the records survive of whatever record they were keeping of this trial. The 6 leaders, though, remain famous, as it's one of the most famous events in the entire prison site. The public execution of those leaders of the raiders. On the south side of the creek, a small gallows was erected and 6 men were hanged. And today, when you pass into the cemetery, you'll even see their 6 graves kept separate. The prisoners at the time felt that their crimes merited them dishonor, buried separate, not shoulder to shoulder with the men who died here honorably in service of their country and their fellow soldier. So interesting how they remembered. So, were they guilty? Were these the ones? Were these the worst of the criminals? Was this justice correct? Hard to say. Hard to know. We weren't there. And so consider that when you see those 6 graves set aside, separate from the rest of the thousands that will pass here because of all those conditions that they're facing. Now, last thing is, thinking about those tunnels, we know the tunnels are difficult. And once you pop up on the outside world, 60 miles to the nearest Union forces or 100 miles to the south. No simple task without supplies, directions, stamina. I mean, these are sick men passing through there. So what it remains, a few more cunning solutions. Anybody got a few other ideas how you're going to try to break out of here? What would you try if not digging?
Get out on your work party.
Work party, absolutely. And one of the subtlest, the sneakiest ways to go, bury the dead, work as a woodcutter or a clerk, become a trusted position, and then someday when they're not paying attention, just walk off. It could be as simple as that. Imagine how difficult it is to tell men apart. As items are seized from Union soldiers, Confederate guards could be dressed in just as much blue as gray. So it's no simple matter. If you have prisoners who are from Alabama, Virginia, and Georgia, even the accent might not give you away. So consider the issues between these men. So wandering away is a very effective, though difficult to track, way to escape. A few others may play dead until they start checking a little more closely that the body is in fact deceased. Even autopsies will come into play eventually.
Wow.
Other ways to escape? Well, transport. Prisoners do not remain here, and it is not always August at Andersonville. The prison population began in February. It climbs all the way till August till we reach that peak of 33,000, and then it falls as almost 100 a day are dying. And also, the war is changing. General Sherman is on his Atlanta campaign. He's coming from Kennesaw and Atlanta, and he gets to Macon, closer and closer. Now, as a commander of this prison site, do you want him access to even a few thousand of his own troops? Not in the middle of enemy territory, and not if it's going to help him in any way. And so the reality is, when he approaches too closely, what do you do with the prisoners, or a good portion of them here? You move them to other places. They also know that this place has gone beyond anything it was built for. And so other prisons were built after this. Camp Lawton is north of Statesboro, Georgia, near Millen, between here and Savannah. A new prison, twice this size. It's got ovens in the middle, and it's got a recruitment station.
Wow.
Things to address what they knew were wrong here. A little bit too little, too late. And so as prisoners are shifted there, they almost call it Andersonville 2, right? Because you're told, pack up your stuff from here. Get on that train, you're going home. Do you go quietly if you think you're going home? You go happily if you think you're going home. But yet you arrive at another prison site. And so for the prisoners who are here, they don't stay here the entire 14 months. They come, and the population will leave, and then when General Sherman turns towards his famous march to the sea, who have they just put in his way? Those prisoners, right? Because they're between here and Savannah. So he turns towards Savannah. What do you got to do with all those prisoners now that you've put closer?
You gotta move them back.
Right on back. Prisoners arrived here once, twice, sometimes 3 times. And that also can be added into if they were held at other prisons on the coast or at Richmond as well. So prisoners could be in multiple prisons at multiple times throughout their lives. So if you see a prisoner who's got 16 or 26 months of captivity, that's why. Even if the prison wasn't open that long, he was at many other places. So coming through here, the idea of transport though, getting on and off that train, right? Anybody willing to jump from a moving train? Some of them were, absolutely. You don't break a neck, you might make a run for it. And who's out there to help you in that countryside? Who is the most obvious person that may assist you?
Slaves.
Every single day. Today we talk a lot about our Underground Railroad helping slaves to freedom in Canada and the North. You know, down here, it's slaves that would help them. Union sympathizers are around, but they're not easily identifiable by a prisoner. But a slave, most of them know that things are changing, and that by aiding them with a knife or some food or directions, gets them to freedom sooner. So all part of the dynamic between these individuals as they're moving out. But very difficult, right? Running 60 miles in open terrain. If I told you your tour ends here, but we'll meet you in Macon with your cars, how would y'all do, right? If folks are not from around here, you don't have a map, instructions, or any kind of notion about how to get to Macon from here. And that's part of the reality for the soldiers from Massachusetts and Ohio and Iowa, all these states where they have no idea where they're going. Last thing's available to you in one of the most obvious and simple and direct ways to get out of any Civil War prison, north or south. You go back to that gate, you report to the officer on duty, and you tell him, I choose to fight for you now. Every single prisoner of war could choose to switch sides. So would you do it? Would you do it? And for thousands of men, that is a heartbreaking decision because they know their families have fought for one army or the other. Their towns have been decimated by this war over the last 3 years. Could you go home if you switch sides? Would your family accept you back knowing your 5 brothers were killed in the other army? What would you do? So for prisoners here, you could galvanize the term, switching sides, changing color. Galvanize. Would you do it? Few hundred will take that option out of the 45,000, but how did the survivors, the men who stuck it out through the disease and violence and just problems endemic in this place, look to the monuments. When you see those monuments closely, look for the phrase, death before dishonor. And in most prisons, that's how cause-driven this war was. They're going to die in these places before they switch sides because it is a matter of their name, their honor, for their state, for their family. That's how important this was. And so looking across here, that is the words of the survivors who came back. And they came back representing the different states. Half of our monuments are here in the prison site, the other half are over in the cemetery. Very vivid stories, images, and numbers. 378 from Wisconsin. And the Wisconsin soldiers camped up on that corner, they said. So that's where our monument will go. Right across the whole prison site. What happens at the end? The war has to end. Prisoners have been moved in and out of Andersonville and other prisons across the South. At the end, the battles will determine the matter. And prisoners ultimately are basically paroled. They're sent north in an unofficial exchange policy to get them out of these southern prisons. The last few months of the war, they're basically sending them to checkpoints in the north. And the prison population drops and drops. When Union forces ride up to that gate, who do they find? A few hundred men so sick they can't even load up on the train to go home. And so the prison, no grand liberation. General Sherman did send troops when they got as close as Macon. He was almost certain they would fail. He knew. And he gave them 3 things that they had to do, his cavalrymen who were coming south. 1, free officers. Officers were held in Macon. 2, mess up the rail lines. His famous axe down here, right among those rail lines, mess them up so they can't use them. 3, if possible, get to Andersonville. But yet, even with a few thousand men here, what must he provide as a commander? For these men, if he frees it, food, shelter, medical, transportation, all the things, does he have time to do so?
No.
That's why he's pretty sure it's not going to work out very well for him or these prisoners at this time. And so both Union and Confederacy felt that the fastest way to end the suffering of prisoners like these men in Andersonville and Elmira and Camp Lawton and Douglas, all across the country, win. Win first, and that resolves it, right? The idea of choice. Now with that, folks, I want to thank you. I know it's warm and we want to make sure everybody stays cool and well watered, but across this place, you're part of the legacy here. The survivors, the men who also are buried in the cemetery, wanted their families, wanted their descendants, wanted anybody who might care to come back and see this place. And that's why it's lovely. It was the wives and daughters of many of those survivors who came back. They planted trees and magnolias and roses and pecans. And they made sure that it didn't become a road or just a field, you know? So as we pass through here, this is part of their legacy. Luckily for us, our museum also is the legacy of later eras, you know? World War II, Vietnam, Korea, all those POWs who knew that there were more stories to tell than just this one. And that's part of our obligation today, part of our duty, and part of one of the best things that I think are part of my job, so being out here. Today, as you move to the National Cemetery, you will see the 13,000 graves of the men who expired in this field, but also almost 7,000 more. We are an active national cemetery. We continue to bury veterans. They don't have to be POWs, but veterans to this day. And passing through there, you'll see additional monuments, and of course the inscriptions on the stones themselves tell a vast story. Even after working here for 2 years, I found out I have a 4th and 5th cousin who served for Massachusetts units.
Huh.
No idea. I'm from Oregon, right? No idea that I would have that kind of connection to individuals this far into the middle of Georgia, and yet it happens. And so hopefully you have an opportunity to make a connection, whether it's to a soldier or a later generation, a monument, a beautiful day even. And it tells us a story about choices, about what choice would you do, and hopefully we can do better, maybe? It's a great hope, I think. All right, folks, you have a great day. I want to thank you on behalf of the National Prisoner of War Museum, and if you have questions, stick around. You can ask them as we are hanging out here, but also just be safe and keep well hydrated today.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.